Spoilers ahead, and welcome back to Venture Recaps. Today, we'll recap a 2005 American natural horror film titled Locusts. At the beginning of the film, we see a couple come into the USDA research lab in Virginia. The couple comes into the lab at night to feed the experimental swarm of Australian plague locusts and are planning to complete the task quickly and go on a date. Willie is an outsider who is horrified at the sight of the insects. He refuses to go inside the box to help feed them, while his girlfriend, Gina, laughs at him and does it herself. The box has two glass doors, one of which requires a code to be opened. After she gets inside with a ficus tree as food, the first door is supposed to be closed so none of the insects can escape. Gina is so confident that she doesn't bother wearing protective gear before making direct contact with the insects. She soon realizes that it was a mistake when the insects start to attack and bite her. Willie runs to help her, but unfortunately, he doesn't know the code to the door. Even while being continuously attacked by hundreds of locusts, she blurts out the code, letting him in. Finally, he uses the protective coat to dust the insects away and brings her out of the box. The couple is out of breath and shaken by what they just experienced. The scene then shifts somewhere else in Washington. Maddie Riordan, the United States Secretary of Agriculture, is with her husband Dan. The couple had planned to spend the day together before Maddie left for a different state that evening. However, their plans are disturbed when Maddie gets a call from her assistant, Vivian. She informs her about a USDA lab that has been flagged by the GAO. Maddie is surprised because she's uninformed about any dangerous experiments taking place in the lab. She tries to investigate using her security contacts, only to find that the information is classified. Because the matter is suspicious, she has to find out about the experiment before her flight that evening. Hence, she ditches the plans with her husband and asks her assistant to be in said lab in 15 minutes. Dan is irritated by the fact that she never has time for him. He has given up a promotion and a salary raise to be there with her, so when she has to go to work, he's even more frustrated. At the lab, Maddie meets her former professor, Dr. Peter Axelrod, who is also the researcher she's supposed to investigate. Peter takes her to the lab where the experimental locusts are being kept. To show what he's created, he extracts a single locust from inside the box and squirts it with a pesticide. To Maddie's surprise, the pesticide does nothing to the insect, meaning that it's immune to it. Peter then says that by breeding the Australian plague locust with the desert locust, he has made a new type of insect. The genetically modified locusts are resistant to all known pesticides. They reproduce 10 times faster than normal locusts, and they live for several years. Hearing that, Maddie realizes that even if one of the insects is let out, it can reproduce at an exponential rate and destroy continents by causing locust plagues. Disappointed, she declares the experiment is a bioweapon that can kill people and assumes it is being funded by the Department of Defense. In the end, she has no choice but to tell the officials to kill all of the hybrid locusts and fire Peter from the lab because he did experiments that were unethical and dangerous. Following that, scientists with protective suits and flamethrowers exterminated all the locusts. But one of them secretly saves a handful of insects in a tube labeled biohazard, and he has been tipped by the Defense Department to acquire them. While changing, he accidentally drops the jar in a sink, causing several locusts to escape down the drain. Later, we see the escaped locust flying away through a manhole. In the next scene, after several hours, Maddie returns home with Dan waiting for her outside. Dan then calmly tells her that he cannot be with her anymore because she prioritizes her work more than him. Maddie tries to explain what's going on, but she doesn't have enough time to convince him before she has to leave for her next mission. Meanwhile, in Maryland, the exterminator brings the last few locusts that he got from the lab, and the case is then transferred to an army truck. Suddenly, the man driving the vehicle is attacked by an unknown insect that looks like the locust that escaped earlier. The accident causes the case to drop off the vehicle and be crushed, causing the insects inside it to be let free into the air. 1 month after the incident, Maddie discovers she is pregnant and calls Dan. He he receives the call but has to end it before she can tell him the news. In the following scene, we see a couple camping by the river, and they wake up to find their tent filled with hundreds of locusts. Then a few hours later, a swarm descends on Napa Valley, causing farmers to run in fear. Maddie, who is on the road with her team, also sees the same swarm flying overhead, and they immediately begin to track its pattern. Somewhere else, Peter is at home discussing their financial condition with his wife. Now that he's unemployed, they're worried about their daughter's future, Sophia. After that, Peter accompanies Sophia to the bus stop and then makes his way to the gym. Suddenly, he hears a strange buzz getting louder. He then stops by a cornfield and witnesses a large swarm of locusts taking off into the sky. On getting a closer look, he is shocked to realize that they are the hybrid locusts that he created. He immediately follows Sophia's school bus, but before he can arrive, the locusts reach the bus and attack the children. Peter arrives and drags an unconscious Sophia to his car. In the next scene, Maddie and her team reach Napa Valley, the farm that was attacked earlier. They see that the locusts have stripped every bush and tree down to the bark. Maddie sees how bad things are and tells the Department of Agriculture about the dangers in Washington, D.C. Dan also finds out about the locust infestation and calls Maddie to ask her about it. Since he works in the U.S. Weather Service, Maddie asks him for an update on weather patterns to predict the swarm's next movement. They guess that one of the two swarms that have been formed on each coast will be moving to Pittsburgh in a few hours. Meanwhile, somewhere in Visalia, California, a crowd has gathered for a citrus festival, unaware of the swarm of deadly insects coming their way. Eventually, Maddie and the team reach the citrus festival and start evacuating it. However, before everyone is in a safer location, the swarm attacks them. Amid the chaos, someone accidentally drops a camera that records the event. In the following scene, the swarm reaches Pittsburgh, forming huge black clouds in the sky. Soon, the insects will cause trouble in the city, getting into homes and offices through the air vents. At Pittsburgh International Airport, Peter meets a worker from air traffic control and asks her not to launch planes to the northeast. However, the workers didn't take him seriously, and because of that, the plane runs into the swarm and crashes with an explosion. Following that, Peter goes back to the hospital with his wife and daughter. They then see the news where the video captured at the Citrus Festival is being broadcast. Just then, FBI agents arrive to arrest Peter and take him into federal custody. At the same time, Maddie meets her boss, Secretary Morales, and many other officials to discuss their next move. Dan is also in attendance because of his expertise in crops. He then recommends they harvest the crops all across the country to starve the locusts and save the crops before they're destroyed. During the meeting, they find that the eastern swarm of creatures has turned carnivorous and has started to eat livestock. They then said that if the locusts were starved, they might feed upon animals and eventually humans. After the meeting, Maddie tells Dan that she is pregnant with his child. He is ecstatic, but they do not have much time to celebrate. Meanwhile, Peter is at the FBI office talking to officials about a way to stop the locusts. He claims that there is no way to stop them without killing 50% of the American population. But the scientists find an alternate way where only 10% of the population will be killed. They plan to drop an extremely toxic VX gas on the locusts to kill them. A while later, Maddie flies in to meet Peter and finds out about the FBI's plan to drop the VX nerve gas. She opposes the plan, comparing it to a nuclear bomb attack that would kill millions. But still, the officials ask her to focus on the billion people who will be saved instead. General Miller wants to do a test of the gas on the swarm that is flying over Ohio. Maddie then agrees to it only because she's been promised that the test will be done in rural areas with almost no population. Still, she calls the national news and secretly tells them about the test run before boarding the helicopter with the rest of the group. When they're airborne, they're informed that the target swarm over Ohio has moved towards southern Indiana, which is way more populated. If they go through with the plan, they will be killing millions of people just because of the test run. Maddie protests, but General Miller replies that he never confirmed there wouldn't be any fatalities. Desperate to do something, Maddie uses a spanner to smash the VX container and says that she will kill everyone on board. With no choice, Miller has to reluctantly turn around before the gas is released. Once landed, Maddie calls Dan and asks him to check on her grandfather, Lyle, whose farm lies right in the path of the Locust. Dan leaves for Indiana immediately, while Maddie and Peter do the same. On his way, Peter gets a call from his daughter, who has come out of the coma. With renewed motivation, they reach the farm and meet Lyle, who is gathering the cattle and moving them indoors. Maddie and Peter help him, and Dan joins them later. Not long after, the farm is attacked by the swarms, and the group has to take shelter in a metal grain silo to save themselves. As they brainstorm ideas to keep the insects away from the harvested grains, Maddie remembers seeing a few locusts get killed in the electric fly trap outside. She gets the idea to use an old generator to send an electric current that will hopefully kill the bugs. They attempt to use it but discover that the generator is out of fuel. Peter volunteers to get the fuel from the other side of the barn and runs outside with a sheet to protect himself. The swarm attacks him immediately, but he manages to get the generator inside. By this time, he is covered in blood, revealing that the insects have grown carnivorous. Lyle loads up the generator, and Dan attaches the cables to the metal shell of the silo, which sends a powerful current through it. The insects that are attacking the silo are killed immediately because of the electricity. But sadly, Peter struggles because he has lost too much blood and eventually dies. Following that, Dan and Maddie rush to Washington, D.C., to the Department of Homeland Security, where the officials agreed to Miller's plan to use the toxic VX gas on the swarms. Maddie and Dan enter the meeting room and try to convince them of their plan. When they suggest using electricity, Miller does not believe it can work. But the Secretary of the Department of Energy says that it is possible to make a huge amount of electricity to kill the swarms, which are getting close to the power grids of the continent. Eventually, all the officials support the plan except Miller, who warns he will act if the plan fails. Maddie then remembers that insects are attracted to light. She then calls the National Weather Service and requests that weather balloons be launched near power lines to attract the locusts. The following day, power is switched off throughout the United States, and it is rerouted to the two power lines, one each in Western and Eastern America. Maddie and Dan arrive at the site and make the Air Force move the weather balloons closer to the power lines. Soon the power grids are activated and the swarms fly into the amplified power cables. Unfortunately, the cables burst into flames, but the plan still works, and the locust swarms are killed by the electricity. The officials who had been holding their breaths celebrate the success, but General Miller is warned about the consequences of wanting to kill millions of people. In the last scene of the movie, 1 year later, we can see that Maddie has given birth to a child and is living a happy life with Dan. She receives an offer for a new job, but consults Dan before accepting, showing that her family is more important to her than her job. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you want to watch more videos like this.